Welcome to the Proud to be Profane podcast, where we're not afraid to drop a few F-bombs, make some dirty jokes, or pee on the all-seeing pyramid of Illuminati enlightenment. And now, here's your host, Mr. Michael Joseph. Welcome to the Proud to be Profane podcast.
Welcome to episode number 17. And today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We have the Three Amigos show of myself, Mark Devlin, and Mike Williams. So the M&M show. And first off, I have to apologize to both of them because we recorded this show at the end of summer, and now we just had daylight savings switchover. So it's been a while, and a lot of things happened that I had to tend to in between, but here it is now, and it's still relative to anything going on today. And the theme of our discussion, loosely based, is the idea of the elephant in the room, or the emperor with no clothes. Things that should be apparently obvious to people, but somehow it's just not quite seen. And this was also kind of a therapeutic show for all of us, where we got in some good rants and exorcised a few demons. And towards the end, we intended to do a more elaborate segment on some solutions, but unfortunately, I also had some technical difficulties at the start of the show, which pushed us back about 30 or 40 minutes. And unfortunately, Mark had to get going because he's a busy guy. Family man, writing books, recording audiobooks, all that good stuff. So things got cut short, and I feel a little bad because we did a lot of ranting and not really giving a lot of solutions, but unfortunately it was just the circumstances of the day, so I apologize for that. And this is also kind of turning into the apologies intro because I will also be going into my own busy mode and have been in that mode for the last few months for obvious reasons previously stated. So what that means is that the podcast will go on hiatus once again. I'm not exactly sure when it will be back, but I do intend to come back with some new or perhaps old guests, but with new content. And on a more personal note, I have a lot of things changing and in transition that I must attend to. I won't elaborate on it here, but at some point there will be new things happening with the channel, and perhaps a new website with a members section. But until then, let's get into the show and rant on some elephants in the room with Mr. Mark Devlin and Mr. Mike Williams. All right, today on the podcast, we have something new. We have our first triple-tiered discussion with Mike Williams and Mark Devlin. And they've also both been on the show before, so welcome back, boys.
Hey, Michael.
Hey, Michael.
And so today, I just want to get you guys together because I thought it'd be an interesting conversation to talk about the theme that Mark likes to use a lot, the elephant in the room. Basically, the very big thing that should be so obvious, and people want to ignore it and won't even look at it. And so there's a lot that can be sort of derived from this. I think the emperor with no clothes analogy is very similar to it. So that's going to be kind of like a loose theme for this discussion, but it's sort of an opportunity for us to rant a little bit. And I guess we want at the end perhaps provide a few solutions so it's not just a bunch of grumpy old men. So we're just going to start it off with Mark and talk about your first elephant in the room on the government would never do that when talking to people about these sorts of things in the quote-unquote matrix or normie world.
Well, that's right. I'm all about elephants in the room, so this is a great show to do. And I just want to say at the outset, Michael, that my voice is a little croaky today. I'm hoping it's not going to cave in. The reason I've almost lost it is because earlier in the week, I decided to undertake a pretty mammoth task, which was to narrate an audio version of my first book, Musical Truth, Volume 1. It's 170,000 words, and I got a little carried away and over-enthusiastic about how much I could do in a day. And I attempted to polish off 5 chapters I spoke non-stop for 8 hours. And when I woke up the next day, I had no voice. So I've had to kind of take it easy over the past few days. And I hope it's going to last for the duration of this conversation. But how the hell does David Icke speak for 10 hours non-stop at his gigs? I just don't understand. But anyway, I'll do my best to maintain. And as far as the elephant in the room for normies, as I believe they're called, regular members of society goes, I just want to sum it up by a statement that you often hear, a two-tiered statement, which would be people say, oh, the government would never do that. And anyway, if they did, the mainstream media would tell us about it. So I can happily go on a bit of a tirade about this one. I did address these very issues on a show that I did a couple of years ago for a listenership made up of normies, regular folk, as in people that don't study conspiracy and truth issues. And it was quite a challenge to keep that kind of listenership in mind and try and make these points. But I think this is a really good way of getting through to people that don't normally look at alternative types of information. So often when you present something to these people that goes right against the grain and which contradicts the official mainstream version of things, you will get that response. Oh, the government would never do that. When you think about it, this response relies on the government being made up of really nice, good, moral people who have humanity's best interests at heart and just want to help us all. Now, really, who is going to say that that is a good summary of people that make up governments? We don't know these politicians that we get served up to us. We know nothing about them. We don't know where they've come from. We don't see what happens when they leave that public stage and when the cameras stop rolling. So why is there this automatic tendency to think of them as nice people that just want what's best for us? What if they were psychopaths? What if they were corrupted people that were serving very malevolent agendas and they were out to harm us? It's something that people really should consider rather than just assuming that these people are on our side. As for the notion that the mainstream media would tell us about what's going on, do people really believe that the BBC and all these other mainstream outlets are made up of brave, courageous, intrepid, conscientious, good, moral individuals that are going to go out there and seek the truth of a matter and then risk life and limb to present it all to us on the evening news? Let's be realistic about it. That's never going to happen. The BBC, to take them as an example, are an arm of the British government concerned with state propaganda. And all the other big mainstream media corporations, CNN and Fox and MSNBC and all the rest of them, are serving the interests of those that own and control them. So can people really expect to get any kind of truth from these organizations when you look into their true nature? It's really ridiculous when you boil it down like that. And another thing that you can often say to people that never really look at truth and conspiracy issues is, okay, I know that you have just dismissed out of hand what I've presented to you in terms of this alternative information, but what if what I've just said to you really is happening? I know you think it sounds crazy and kooky and all the rest of it, but what if it were really happening? And what if this threat were really posed to you and your family? Do you not think that's something that you should look into and that you have a duty and an obligation to your loved ones to spend a bit of time researching? And I think when you present it that way to most people, they would say, well, yeah, if this kind of thing was happening, I would want to know about it. So you can then go on and say, well, actually, the scenario that I've just outlined to you is not a fictional one. This is what's going on. And here's a whole load of data and information to back up the claim. So you can present people with that. And I think the majority would still scoff at you and tell you that you're crazy. So I guess they didn't really want to know that badly after all then. People need to consider whether they can afford to take the chance that us conspiracy nuts might just be right about something. And I always think about a scene from the James Bond movie Goldfinger whenever I consider this dynamic. So if people haven't seen the film, there's a point where James Bond, played by Sean Connery, is strapped to a table in Goldfinger's lair, and he's about to be castrated by a laser beam. So, he's got his legs spread, and there's this laser beam getting closer and closer to his vital area. And Bond is sweating away, trying to bluff his way out of this situation, trying to talk his way out of it. And he tries to get Goldfinger to believe that he knows more about his mission and what it is he's up to than he really does. Goldfinger thinks about what he's saying for a second and says, "Oh, you're just bluffing, Mr. Bond." And then Bond responds by saying, "Can you afford to take that chance?" Goldfinger thinks about it for a few seconds, then he shuts the laser beam down and he says, "You're right, Mr. Bond. You're worth more to me alive than dead." So he's considered the situation and he's thought, well, he may be bluffing, but I can't afford to take the chance that he's not. And I think that speaks to this situation, because can normies really afford to take the chance that conspiracy folk that are trying to tell them about what's going on in the world might just be right, when the welfare of you and your loved ones is at stake, and when we're talking about the complete enslavement of humanity if these agendas are allowed to continue? And what it all boils down to, I think, is that people have basically comfortable lives and they don't want anything to rock the boat. And this is what the control system relies on. It allows the majority of people to have what they themselves consider to be a basically comfortable life. Of course, there are poor people who that statement doesn't apply to, that have terrible lives. But I think for the most part, people are allowed to have just enough creature comforts to feel that everything's basically okay in the world. And if they were to take any kind of stand against the control system or rock the boat in any way, that would affect the comfortable, cozy lifestyle that they've got. They rather like it that way. They don't want to do anything to upset that. So there's a strong reliance on most people just falling into that mindset. And they don't want to risk losing this, through any kind of opposition to the status quo. And another thing I think is a good way of getting this point across to people is to ask them to suspend their incredulity for a minute and just consider what they themselves would do if they were psychopathic, crazed sociopaths that had the enslavement and the control of humanity as their main priority. If you were one of these individuals, I know you're not, but just imagine for a second that you were, and this was your agenda. Would you seek to control governments all over the world by corrupting and bribing and bringing on board prominent politicians so that they do your bidding and sing according to your hymn sheet? Well, yeah, you probably would. Would you seek to have all mainstream media outlets that the majority of people go to for all their news and all their information on what's going on in the world? Would you seek to have these organizations absolutely under your control so that you dictate the narratives that they put out? Well, yes, you probably would. Would you seek to lock down the entertainment industry in the same way and make sure that the only people that become prominent movie stars, prominent musicians, prominent TV presenters are those that are down with the program and that are, again, a part of the agendas that you've set out for them? Well, yes, you probably would. When you ask people to consider what they themselves would do in this kind of position, if they're being honest with themselves, I think most of them would acknowledge that they would do exactly what the control system that we have has done. So when you are able to look at things in that way, is it really still so difficult to comprehend the kind of dynamic that we have in this world, that everything we're told is a lie? And these are all aspects of a deeply malevolent control system that has anything but our best interests at heart. So I think when it comes to these statements, the government would never do that. And if they did, the mainstream media would tell us about it. I hope that breakdown illustrates just how naive those statements are and how they give away the fact that all people are really doing is just trying to maintain the comfortable status quo that they've got in their lives. deep down, I think you'd have to be in a very heavy state of denial to not recognize that these statements are ridiculous when you look around and really pay some attention to what's going on in the world.
Well, I agree with everything Mark has just said. And I think that we have to come to grips with the fact that the vast majority of the masses, they don't critically think. And it's because they really don't understand what critical thinking is, what free thinking is. And it's because of the conditioning. What they have is they're immersed in vices like drugs and alcohol, sex, celebrities, TV, movies, and that's their world. And it's like the bread and circuses, going back to Rome. You just feed them this stuff, and Mark, as you had said, they think everything's okay. It actually doesn't get any better than this. That's actually the mentality. So it's like it's the bread and circuses going back to the days of Rome, where there's all of this distraction, and people actually believe that this is just the way it is. Some people like the way their life is, or they believe they like the way it is, because they don't know how life can be any better. They have no baseline. There's no reference point. They just, like, as an example, if you are upper middle class or you have some money and you belong to a golf club and you're part of a wine tasting club and all that stuff, you're thinking it doesn't get any better than this. But it's all this material world aspect that is formulating who you are as a human being, or what you think a human being is. And it's the furthest thing from being human as you can possibly get. But this is the level of conditioning that has been put forth and what most people embrace. If you're poor, obviously you're thinking to yourself, I don't like being poor. I'd like to have more money. But a lot of people who are poor think that this is their lot in life, and they're just going to have to bite the bullet, and hopefully something in the future happens, they can catch a break. But the problem with all this is that nobody's thinking critically in all of this. They're not taking a look at how they're being bamboozled every single day. They're being deceived and lied to by their politicians, by their clergy. And some people take issue with the clergy, but what I mean by that is there's a lot that goes on behind institutionalized religion too that needs to be inspected and needs to be understood, and people just take that at face value. So I guess really to kind of maybe summarize what I'm saying is I don't babble on too long. There's a quote, it's attributed to Chris Hedges, but I'm not really sure Chris said this, but in any case, the quote itself is very good. It says, "We now live in a nation where doctors destroy health, lawyers destroy justice, universities destroy knowledge, governments destroy freedom, the press destroys information, religion destroys morals, and our banks destroy the economy." And I guess the point I'm making is that most people don't see that. That's the problem that we have. They don't understand that the banks are destroying the economy, or they don't understand that lawyers are destroying the justice system, or that universities are destroying knowledge, and that governments are actually destroying freedom. They don't see that. They believe the lies when, they send our children off to war to go fight for democracy and fight for freedom. And just taking your children and sending them off into harm's way, sure. And for many people, their children do not come back alive, or they come back severely injured or maimed. And if you're very lucky, your child comes back and they're okay physically, but a lot of them are suffering from psychological issues. There's such a psychological trauma that our soldiers, the men and women who are out there fighting, come back with, and it creates a dysfunction that's incredible. So the number of ways in which they contaminate and pollute the mind-body dynamic is incredible. It really is. And that's the problem. I really struggle with it. It's because when I do try to talk to people about this, Michael and Mark, I try to get the point across, even just to kind of spoon feed it, it's very, very difficult because people will shut down. It goes back to what you were saying, Mark. Well, why would they do that?
If I could just chip in here a second, Mike, I think it goes back to the comment I made earlier, which is that people tend to assume that politicians, military leaders, people that you see reading the news, people in charge of universities and educational establishments and stuff, scientists, are nice people. People tend to assume that they've got to those positions because they're fine, upstanding, moral individuals that command our respect, that we should all look up to. But what if they're not? It's worth considering
Right.
the scenario that these people got to those positions for the exact opposite reason. They're anything but fine, upstanding, moral individuals. They've been selected for those influential roles because of the effect they can have on large numbers of people that serves the control system's malevolent agenda. So there is this tendency to think of these people as good and on our side. And really, people need to consider the alternative option. They're not on our side.
People like to embrace authority. And the last thing that they do is put themselves in a position of authority. You are your authority. But they defer out to other people.
That's right.
Right?
Because it's easier to do that.
Exactly.
It's easier to just disempower yourself to an authority figure. You allow them to make difficult decisions on your behalf, and you kind of tell yourself that in some way they're qualified better than you to make these kind of decisions. So you just go by whatever they decide when it's you and your family's welfare which is at stake. We should not be externalizing our power like this. We need to all recognize the power that we hold within ourselves so much more. But society has been entrained and conditioned to think that there are certain people that are better qualified than us, more important than us, more intelligent than us. And so, these problems arise.
Yeah. Yeah. So Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, a lot to respond with that. Like you were just saying about the idea of authorities and stuff like that. I think it's also an aspect of, if you're looking to somebody as an authority on something, I think there's something natural about that depending on your situation in life. Obviously, children, and as you grow up or as you try to learn more about something, you're going to need other people that have more wisdom on a certain topic. But the problem is, I think the elephant with that is that people disregard immoral behavior and suppress it or ignore it. And so who cares if somebody knows a lot about a subject if they're not behaving in a way that is going to be, I guess, have a soul, for lack of a better term, then this is the disconnect. People put faith in the accolades. Like the athletic world is the greatest example. I mean, me growing up, I was like the biggest fan of Michael Jordan when I was like, I don't know, 12 years old. And he's the best basketball player ever. But as I grew older, I realized what a huge asshole he is. And so, but the thing is, some people just, when you have that material world perspective, or that sort of Darwinian perspective where, the evolution, survival of the fittest, you tend to just be like, oh, that's fine. I think that's a lot of people's mindset. Even if they don't know it, I think that it's subconsciously built into them, rather than, hey, you know what? I'm not going to deny that he did all these amazing things, but so what? He had all kinds of gambling debts that I think that there was a conspiracy as to why his dad actually died. That's just my own pet theory. But, and you hear him talk and people's stories about interacting with him. He's just a huge dick. And I'm just like, is that somebody that you should put on the pedestal like that? And that's just a one example, but you can do that in politics and anything else. But with the science world and the doctor's world, that's a different animal, because that's the intellectual world. It's not sports, it's not primal instinct or something like that. And so you're conditioned to trust them more based on, oh, they're helping people, right? Oh, you're a doctor helping, you're a lawyer trying to defend people's rights and stuff like that. And it's not that people trying to help others through a legal dispute or health, that's not intrinsically bad in itself. It's just the behavior that people ignore. And that's the problem with like the pharmaceutical things and everything. Everyone's just like, throw a pill at it and make a bunch of money for these big companies, and people will just completely ignore those mega interests because they're so blinded by the macro programming, the symbolic archetypal programming of a doctor, of a lawyer, things like that. And then they lose the details about what is actually just a moral human being. And then also there's an accountability on your own end, where you were talking about the idea of having your own free will choice. if you defer to an authority that is corrupted, then it's just going to come back and bite you in the ass. And that's the problem. People don't want to admit that they invested their own energy in trusting something, because that also invests a certain amount of their own ego. It's like somebody might not be egoic as you meet them. They might not be like, you know, oh, I'm the hottest shit walking around. But you can still have an ego by trusting other people that have led you astray and just blindly following them, because you are kind of deferring your will onto them. And when they start to fall, if people start picking holes in particular companies or groups or anything like that, you've endorsed that. So it's hard for you to admit that you screwed up and put your faith in something that was actually perhaps designed to eat you up, you know? And I think that is the disconnect. It's a lot of ideas floating around about like, oh, spirituality, freedom, authority, but this is where we argue on these things. What's the definitions of that? And I think that's the key issue, is people aren't able to come to some consensus on the real definitions of that, and that's like the chaos of our world, I think.
I was thinking about this during the week. You mentioned doctors and lawyers and university lecturers and people like that. And these are professions that we're trained to think of with great reverence. They're obviously highly paid. They're respected in society. People try and encourage their kids to take on one of these professions. But I was musing in the week over how much we would miss these people if they took a day off, versus how much we would miss other people who have genuinely helpful roles in society. So think about garbage men, right? The dustmen, the guys that come and empty your bins. Now, if they took a day off when they were supposed to come and empty your bins, we'd really miss them. That would really affect us. Think about people that work in sanitation, in the sewage works. You know, if these guys took a few days off, imagine the chaos that would cause. You know, these are people who are really serving communities and they have valuable, constructive roles. Compare that with a lawyer or some kind of lecturer. Would we really miss a lawyer if he took a day off, you know? And it's obvious that the roles that are the best paid and the ones that are the most respected in society are the ones that serve the control system the most, in terms of the indoctrination and the mind control and the way they want us all conforming and thinking about things. But they're not the most valuable roles in society. Those are these more humble, working class, hands-on professions, which aren't financially rewarded very well, but they have the true value in society. So once again, it's another example of how everything is twisted and inverted upside down in this crazy world in which we find ourselves. Just a random thought I wanted to throw in there.
Yeah, and then you think about the bureaucracy that creates all these jobs that people are really not doing anything, but these are kind of like the higher echelon jobs, you know? And if you create a sick society, you're going to have more social workers and all these sorts of things that probably aren't even necessary if people on that, you know, the level of the average person took a bit more responsibility on some things. And before I throw it over to you, Mike, I'll just give a quick example of, you know, destroying yourself. You know, it's like looking at certain celebrities. Like I always like using Beyonce as this example, and she had her whole Black Panther Super Bowl thing, right? And everyone's like, oh yeah, you know, down with white privilege, all that kind of stuff. And it's like, well, she's on stage wearing like $500,000 worth of diamonds that probably came from slave mining in Africa, and everyone's saying she's this great social justice warrior. I mean, that's an elephant in the room to me. Like, that is a disgusting display of hypocrisy, but people don't care. They care more about this idea of feeling like they are, you know, fighting oppression rather than actually looking at the logistics of it. So go ahead, Mike.
No, I was just going to say, at Mark's point, going back to authorities and lawyers and doctors, and one of the things that I have said on many other shows is a lot of folks that are in these professions are actually very good people. I'll use the medical profession as an example. Many people who are doctors and nurses and so on, technicians, they're very good people and they really want to help. The problem, though, is that they are experts in a field where they are only allowed to know so much information. In other words, people like to say, oh, in the United States, we have the best medical care, which we don't. We have the best medical technology. Well, we don't. And what I mean by that is that it's all geared toward this approach for medicine, which is essentially, this is what Western medicine comes down to: surgery and pharmaceuticals, and any other alternative types of medicine. Cannabis, as an example, rife technology. It goes on and on and on. People listening to this will understand what I'm saying. That's never talked about. That's never brought to the forefront. When it was getting some traction, they make sure they squash it right away. And so the point I'm making is that people who are experts in these areas really are experts in a sub-optimized approach to healing. But we put them on a pedestal because they're really smart at this sub-optimized process. But most people have no clue that it's sub-optimized. I know people, friends, very close friends, who are going through some very rough times now with regard to health issues. And anytime I try to talk to them about perhaps getting an alternative perspective or view from an integrative medical doctor or a doctor of natural medicine, they don't want to listen to it. They would rather go to the Western doctor and have them prescribe the chemicals, which are the drugs, the chemo, if you have cancer, those types of approaches, which when you do the research, as you guys have and I have, I'm not saying, I'm the ultimate expert in alternative medicine and healing, but I know enough to know that these approaches that they are rolling out to the public and to the masses because they're quote unquote unhealthy, these things are not healthy. And people don't want to hear it. They just are so entrenched in the conditioning that says, no, we have the best medicine. We have the best medical technology. This is what you need to do. Don't pay any attention to any of that other stuff that's quackery. You need to stay over here. And that's what I see. It's even in the legal system, right? I know people who are lawyers, and they're really good people. But what most people don't understand is the legal system is set up in order to take rights from you, to essentially de-sovereign you, if that's even a word, right? It's just to continue to take your freedoms away. That's what our legal system is about. It's about extracting your rights. And our legal system isn't even embedded in the Constitution. People keep talking about the Constitution, and it's a bunch of nonsense. We are ruled by admiralty law, maritime law. It's corporate contracts, and it's the Uniform Commercial Code. It's the UCC. That is our legal system. But people are still duped into believing that the Constitution means something. And again, I have friends and family that will sit there with their pom-poms in front of their television set and wave them and think, oh, the Constitution, they're violating the Fourth Amendment, they're violating the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, and so on. In the meantime, they don't even understand that the Constitution doesn't even exist anymore. For all intents and purposes, it does not exist. The legal system is about the Uniform Commercial Code, and it's all admiralty law. So, where am I going with this? It's just that they are praising and bowing down to these particular professions, not understanding that these professions, or the inner workings of these professions, not the people per se, okay? I'm going to extract the people out of the situation. It's the way it's been staged. The controllers have staged this, is what I'm saying. And they're telling you a story. They're lying to you and telling you it's the best of the best. We have the best legal system, there's justice, we have the best medical system, and so on. But you don't. You don't. But the people who are working in those areas think that they do, and then the entire population is duped into believing that it's the best of the best. And that's why the whole awakening process, I know I'm babbling on here, is very, very difficult, because trying to get people to take a step back and to take a look at even some of what I just talked about here, like as an example, researching the legal system and understanding what it's really all about. Lawyers belong to the bar. The bar is a secret society that goes back to the crown back in Britain. It has nothing to do with the United States, the Republic of the United States, right? If you try to talk to people about that, right over their head. They don't want to hear it. They just really can't. It doesn't register. There's only a very small percentage of the population that will say, you know what, I think that I'm going to take a look at that and I'm going to research it. Very, very small percentage. Everybody else just basically folds their cards and, they go along to get along. Basically, that's it at the end of the day.
Yeah, we're just back to these comfortable lives again, aren't we? Where people are given just enough to feel that life is basically okay. I'm thinking of that George Carlin routine where he's talking about a society that's just smart enough to operate all the machines and keep the system running, but are kept too dumb to question too much how they're being shafted by the whole thing. I had an uncle who died of cancer a couple of years ago, and he was told about alternative cures by my dad and myself, because my dad knows about this stuff. And he said to him, instead of going for this chemo and radiotherapy, which is killing you because it's giving you the very radiation that causes cancer in the first place, why don't you look at some of these alternative health cures? There's all these natural herbal remedies that are available with proven track records of success. And he didn't want to know. He was a military man. He'd spent his career in the Royal Air Force. So he'd been indoctrinated with the system's way of thinking throughout his life. And he'd been trained to think of the doctor in the white coat as the ultimate authority on his health. The doctor tells him what's best for his body rather than him making that decision for himself. And that's just a case in point about how the majority of society think. They just externalize to these authority figures. So, he died a couple of years ago without even giving these alternatives a go. If you're on your way to dying, is it not worth just giving it a try?
Yeah, for sure. And I've had a lot of people in my life that have had that same pattern. I mean, that happened to my mother when I was younger. It happened to a good friend of my family. They got cancer, and then they eventually go in for chemo or radiation, and it works for a little bit because it just destroys everything. But then it also destroys, bacteria or other things that you need, as far as I understand it. And I'm no scientist. I can't prove that I say that, but I see the result again that, they go back in 6 months and now the cancer spread even further. It went away for a while. And to me, this is another one of my own conspiracy theories about it, but it would make sense if it fits in with a depopulation agenda. It would be very interesting to make medicine, technology, pills, and whatnot that does a band-aid solution. So people think it helps for a little bit because it's numbing something or it destroys the problem, but also destroys a lot of the other things that are important for you. And then that's kind of hand in hand with the dumbing down of society where people are only focused on some quick, easy thing, like the quick tweet. Oh, I just need a headline or a tagline to know what's going on. I got all these other things to do. I can only get my news by just reading a headline, and this is our problem, that we go along without looking at the details and get fooled by these macro things. And then so people are in this state of duality where they don't think that thing that did help them for a little bit is actually hurting them. And, this goes into so many different territories in life. And I think that the other thing is, when, Mike, you were saying how we have this idea that we have the best technology and the best this and that, I think that we have the best technology in an allurement sense. Like, we have all these fancy things, like, these fancy laser surgery things, or what I mean? It's all it seems very scientific. I've had some of my own health issues that I've had to go and have surgeries for, and I am thankful for them because certain things did help. But that's the other component of this. There is things mixed in with Western medicine that do work and do help that you might need, but there's a lot of shit too. And it's no different, I think, on the alternative side. And this is, I think, where people have a little bit of a harder time jumping into that, because you can hear of a lot of quack cases that are really insane people promoting something. But then at the same time, there's other aspects of it that have things that do work. And so you have to navigate both of those systems of the, I guess I could call it the exoteric and esoteric medicine. And there's problems that you have to have the same discernment when you go into both of them. And the problem is, somebody will pick one example where something was very bad, and they'll paint the broad brush of, oh, anything alternative is that, or anything Western is that. And then some people, go on the off the deep end with the alternative stuff, and maybe they actually did need a specific Western thing. But I think what, Mike, you were saying is, what is the first choice when somebody gets cancer or something like that? It's not to change your diet, to start figuring out all the best things to eat, and also figuring out your emotional issues. That plays a huge role. Like, what are some things that people aren't dealing with that gives them stress? And then this also ties into all of the news that people watch. They're constantly in fear of nuclear bombs and ISIS and all of these stupid so-called virus outbreaks, back when, the Ebola virus and all this stuff. So you combine all these things, it's just a giant shitstorm, and it's designed to keep people from being able to detach from all of that emotional fear and just kind of look at some of the logical things, and then be able to combine their intuition with the logic in a healthy way. It's like that separation synthesis thing, but we just get thrown into this polarity game with it all, and it really happens from birth, from when we grow up, and we're given this education system where we just go through school and we just get the answers to the tests and we fill in the right things and we know we get an A, and then we move along, but we don't actually understand why that's the answer. And I think that's the biggest problem.
Yeah, no, and you're right, Michael. There is a place of Western medicine. So I'm not saying that the technology is not helpful. My point being is that they have technology, no doubt, that's very helpful, but they also do not have technology, or they don't roll out technology that would be very helpful. As an example, frequency, the use of frequency to be able to eradicate disease. We don't see that. That's not mainstream. They know that it works. They know that it's been around a long time, but they don't roll that out to the masses, is my point. So as an example, if you're going for an MRI, obviously an MRI technology is good to be able to identify certain issues within the body. But then once it's done with the MRI, it's how they go about treating it. That's the point that I make. And the treatment is, again, Western medicine is two things. It is surgery, removing something, extracting something, cutting something out, and it's chemicals, it's pills, it's pharmaceuticals. And so what people have to get into their heads is that human beings, your body does not want foreign substances like chemicals to be introduced into the body. And that's why all of these pharmaceuticals, they may address one particular issue, but then there are all of these side effects, and that's because it is an abnormal inorganic substance that's being put into the body. And what the medical apparatus is doing, in my view, and it's very sick, is they're using human beings as guinea pigs. They're sitting there in the lab trying to figure out how they can bypass the natural process of healing. How can we do it artificially? How can we do it our way, and see if we can be as good as nature? This might sound crazy to some folks, but I think that that's where their thinking is. How can we be as good as nature? Mm-hmm. And so there's this pursuit of this technology and furtherance of pharmaceuticals in order to one-up Mother Nature.
Yeah,
and that's the problem.
Mike, sorry, can I just clarify something? I actually was agreeing with your point that the technology, it seems fancy and like radiation stuff like that. It has that allure of being high tech, but it's actually destructive. And and then with something like an MRI, there's dangers of that too, but they want to just throw them out to people as like the first thing. So I just didn't want you to misconstrue what I was trying to say. I was actually agreeing, but it's just the idea that the technology seems so fancy that people think that is, America is leading the way. Just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, and just quickly, we'll turn over to Mark. I'm getting that echo again.
Yeah.
I'll turn it over to Mark in a second here. Let me just make one point. This is me. This is a personal story. Okay, so I recently had a procedure where I had an issue with my esophagus, and everything's okay. But part of the solution by the medical doctor was that he wanted to put me on what they call a proton pump inhibitor, PPI. People will know it as Prilosec, Nexium, Protonix, and stuff like that. And it's the acid reflux medication. Now, the acid reflux business, the the drugs are, there's going to be an avalanche of lawsuits that are coming, that are on the horizon, because they have found out now that long use of these types of drugs over many, many years actually has now contributed to stomach cancer, cancer of the esophagus, which the medical doctors are actually using as a way to prohibit the possibility of cancer of the esophagus. Now they're finding that people are on these drugs for years and years, and they're getting stomach cancer and esophageal cancer. So when I was done with my procedure, the nurse had come into me, and she was talking to me about, okay, so the doctor prescribed particular proton pump inhibitor, PPI. For me, it was Protonix. And I said to her, well, you do know that there are significant problems with these drugs. And I spoke to her about stomach cancer, cancer of the esophagus, and he had prescribed it to me. He said I had to be on it for life. Now, the point I'm making for the audience is that the nurse and obviously the doctor are completely unaware of what is brewing on the horizon with these particular drugs. That they don't have the wherewithal. They're not looking at it. They're not researching it. They're not every once in a while taking a step back and saying, let's take a look at what it is that we're prescribing. Let's take a look at the whole process of how we're going about this. No, they're just handing it out the same as they always did. And it was very, very disheartening to me, because the nurse said to me, she goes, really? Are you serious? I'm like, yeah. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and make it up. I'm in the recovery room. And so the point I'm making is even the people that are really trying to do the right things, they're completely oblivious. They're unaware of the consequences of what it is that they're engaged in. And like I said, they're good people. They just don't know.
Well, what Mike was saying just there about how often when you're given pharmaceutical drugs, they bring on various side effects, but you don't have to worry because there's going to be another pharmaceutical drug to treat the side effect. And this happens so often as well. So you have people on 5 or 6 different types of medication, all prescribed by their doctor, and it's just this ongoing chain of symptoms that it's being used to treat. Of course, the pharmaceutical cartel doesn't mind that at all, because they're all about profit and they don't want healthy people. It's in their interest to have a nation of sick people because that's their customer base. And so it continues on. And the crazy thing about so many pharmaceutical drugs is that they are manufactured to mimic the effects of naturally occurring plant medicines and herbs. So in laboratories, they're synthesizing products which occur in nature. Now, I might be a bit slow on the uptake here. Maybe I'm not the smartest guy, but I can't help thinking that you could just go straight to nature and administer the plant medicine in the first place to avoid making all these chemical concoctions with all this unnecessary cost attached to it. Maybe I'm just missing the point here. And I think another aspect of all that, where you've got this control system taking things that occur in nature that are inherent to creation and creating their own bastardized, golemized laboratory versions of it, is just another expression of the satanic mindset that pervades this society, which is all about taking something that is inherent to nature, that occurs in creation, and turning it on its head, twisting and distorting it, and coming out with the exact polar opposite of it. So that's why we've got medicine being administered that's anything but natural. And it just speaks to the society that we have. We're getting into the realms of artificial intelligence and transhumanism here, and I want to have a bit of a diatribe and a rant about that as we progress in the conversation. But that's just another expression of what we've got going on. We've got an all-pervading satanic mindset, which is at the heart of the control system. And that's why everything that's natural and is good for the human body is being squashed and kept out. And everything that's artificial and synthetic is being pushed as the only way to go about things.
Yeah, and I think what you were saying, Mike, about your experience, them trying to be pill pushers on you, I mean, I've had that experience too, where I went to a doctor. It was the first time when I moved down to Boston. I got set up with health insurance. I figured, okay, I'll go get checked up. And, being down here, traffic's worse. There's a lot more stress going on. So I was trying to find this place. I found it. I was late. And so I was a bit stressed out about it. So I get in there, and the preliminary nurse takes my blood pressure, and it's high. And I never have high blood pressure. In fact, people always tell me it's lower than normal. And then right on the spot, she was ready to set me up with a prescription pills for life, basically. That was like, oh, we need to get you on prescription to lower that and blah, blah, blah. But I'm just like, I've never had high blood pressure. Like, because I haven't been there before, it was new. They just are looking at me like, oh, let's just do this. And then the actual doctor came in later. And like you were saying, Mike, there's like people in this industry, they're trying to do good. And some of them do know what they're talking about. And this woman was like, oh, were you stressed out getting here? I was like, yeah, I was late, whatever. And then she took my blood pressure, 30 minutes later, and it was back to normal. So it just goes to show you how people are trained to believe in the pills, and they think they're doing the right thing. And that's what's so hard, I think, to convince people about a nefarious thing, because they see the people that treat them in the hospitals, and they seem like nice, good people. They can have a normal conversation with them. And that is the biggest disconnect. And that is the biggest thing, I think, that prevents people from realizing that there's a greater agenda. Because when they deal with local politics or stuff like that, they don't see all of that shady stuff. I'm not saying it isn't going on in local politics, but it's just that there are people intermingled with that aren't part of this Illuminati agenda, but they get brought up to a higher point where they have to make a decision where, like, oh my God, you know what? Something is not right here. I see all these bad things happening, but what do I do? Like, I've built my whole life to get to this point. It's kind of like in I think The Godfather 3, when Michael Corleone is trying to get out of the system, and he tries to go legit, and then he says, the higher up I go, the more corrupt it is, or whatever, and it's kind of this collective system that you're interacting with on an individual level. And the last thing I wanted to say about the pharmaceutical stuff and how these good intentions work against us is, I remember, when Obamacare happened and everyone was talking about, this is the greatest thing, you're going to be able to give all these poor people health care. But what you're really doing, if you look at it from the conspiratorial angle, is you're getting all of these big companies taxpayer money to push their drugs on poor people who grow up in an environment that is not good for them. They're not going to be able to critically think about these things if they grow up in, a shitty environment and they're being given shitty food. They're exploiting those people by having them go and, hook them up with pills and stuff like that. So when people say that, oh, we're caring about less fortunate people, no, you're just drugging them up. And if I was a person in these communities, I would be pissed off that they're really destroying them. And this is my problem with like all of these racial politics. When people have this quote unquote white privilege that everyone talks about, their viewpoint on people in these situations is so racist. They're like, oh, these poor black people, they can't do anything for themselves. We just need to give them all this stuff. And oh, you're giving them all these addictive medication. You know what I mean? Like it's actually oppressing them, and you're calling yourself the liberator. And that's my biggest problem with so many of these things, is that the macro concept does not match the details that are attached with it. And while all these people are feeling very self-righteous that they voted for this social healthcare system, who's really getting rich off of it? Big corporations that all these leftists think that they're fighting. And that is one of the elephants in the room that I just bash my fucking head against the wall, being like, if I talk to any of these people about it, they're so programmed with like, oh, you're talking like a racist. And I'm like, no, I'm being anti-racist. You're the fucking racist. You know what I mean? And it's just like, they will not comprehend that. I'm sorry to rant, but that's one thing that really charges me dealing with people like this. They will not see that. And because they went through a quote unquote education system into a college that was just brainwashing them into all of this leftist ideology, they think that they're smart because, oh, I dropped out of school, so I'm an idiot, basically.
Yeah, I mean, it's just people like to have that feel good mentality. And, so, and you're absolutely right, Michael, it's all this brainwashing that's taking place. And And the other thing I want to talk about white privilege, right? I mean, one of the things I've always said is that the people that have created the whole chasm with regard to the races, whites, blacks, Hispanics, whatever, is not us. We didn't create this. This was created by the controllers, right? This is part of what they do, is they pit one race against another. So when they talk about, then we're talking about white privilege and how the white man has it good, and the black man does not. That's not because of me or you or Mark. That has to do with the class structure that was put in place by the controllers. So if you want to point your anger towards somebody, then you need to point it in the right direction. You need to point it at the right people or groups of people that are actually behind these agendas. And that's what it is. It's an agenda. So, I mean, I wasn't responsible for slavery, but the controllers were responsible for slavery. So why don't you do a little homework and a little research and understand what really went on with the slave trade and who benefited? See, but people don't want to do that. So what they do is they take the little news bits and the programming that they get through their colleges and the universities, and they take that and they just broad brush it across all of society, right? All white people are bad, or even what white folks who are very bigoted and racist that want to go out there and just paint the broad brush about the black race, or just pick any race. It's wrong. It's so wrong. And the problem is because there is a lack, in my view. If we had more investment in truly educating people, truly educating them with knowledge and wisdom, all of this stuff would just go away. All of this stuff comes together. All of this hatred and categorizing people and putting labels on them is part of the controller's game plan, right? Divide and conquer. That's what it's all about. And that's what the young minds, many of them coming off the universities today, they do not understand that. And that's why we have this mess out there. It's a total circus out there. It's a clown show.
What you were saying there, Mike, about how we didn't invent all these problems with race relations and slavery and all the rest of it, and yet people don't tend to go after the ones that did. They just focus their anger and their attention elsewhere. It's the same thing as when the likes of you and I try and tell people about the true nature of the Beatles or the Rolling Stones or the Doors or some other aspect of how the corporate music industry was constructed to mind control you and sow cultural values into society and things like that. Instead of getting mad at those that put these programs into place, or even the musicians themselves, they get mad at the likes of you and I, telling them that it's going on. It's a case of shoot the messenger. People get really pissed off at you and they'll say, why did you have to go and do that? You've ruined my memories of the 60s. You've tarnished my view of my favorite rock icon. You've ruined it all for me now. But really, they should be getting mad at those that put these things into place. But it's far easier to get mad at the messenger than to go to the very root of the problem, because that's just going a little bit too deep for most people. And once again, we're back to people not wanting to upset their comfortable little lives, the status quo that they've got. People like to labor under the delusion that things are basically okay. I think most people would acknowledge that there are some problems in the world, but they see these as random standalone things. A terrorist incident here, a financial bank collapse there, a corrupt government in this country. They don't tend to see it as connected and as indicative of a wider problem. They think that basically life is okay. And if we can just iron out the odd problem here and there, we can just go on as before, as we were, business as usual. Like the pharmaceutical industry, business as usual for them is dishing out as many pills and as many doses of radiotherapy as they can. Business as usual in the meat industry is slaughtering as many animals as they can per year to provide for people's meat eating habits. And there's all these different expressions of society where it's business as usual. The cogs just keep on grinding, the conveyor belts keep on running, and we do everything the same as we did yesterday and last year and last decade. And so it just rolls on, So there's a lot of things that need to change. My voice is about to go.
Yeah, well, I'll wrap up with my last elephant in the room for the, in the Matrix world. But just to respond real quick, Mark, you've talked about the prison system and hip hop and stuff like that, and the exploitation of black people through that, and that is real. We're not saying that there isn't exploitation that's racial, but people want to target it to just one group has been oppressed, where you can look to white Irish people being oppressed. There was actually a slave trade that took Christians from European nations to the North African Muslim nations, and there was I'm starting to read this book called, I think it's Christian Slaves, Muslim Masters, and all of the people who were the masters were black Muslims. So you can find oppression of any group, and I think that that's what people don't realize, is that the entirety of humanity and every race is being oppressed by all these controllers, but there is an aspect of our own complicity in it where we allow these things to happen, or we put people up on a pedestal that are doing this to us, and it's the Stockholm syndrome. But that aside, this kind of transitions into my elephant in the room, and it's really about people worshiping well, first of all, the news as like this source of education and truth, and then from that, just the education system itself. So it's like, this is where I always go with people who aren't looking into any of this conspiracy stuff and would probably look at me like I have two heads if I started bringing it up. But if I want to try to engage in some of the issues, I always go to television, and I'm just like, I'll tell them, like, I don't watch TV. I haven't watched TV for a long time. I don't own a TV. Yeah, I go online and I watch certain things, but at least I have an element of control, versus when you watch TV, everything that's on there is paid programming by corporate entities that allow something to be on there. No matter if they're revealing some truth or not, it's still always controlled to suit their agenda. So my biggest problem was, when I was growing up, my dad would always have the news on, and I'd just walk by and I'd see what they were talking about, and I'm just like, it would just drive me crazy, because they talk to the people like they're 2 years old, and they give you all of these statistics and facts that they don't tell you where they come from. Like, oh, new studies say that this or that. And I remember at least learning in school how statistics can be distorted. Like, there's one of those examples where, like, if you have like X amount of people who have, like 9 people have 1 rock, and then the 10th person has 100 rocks. And then you take the average of those, depending on the system, it comes out, to an average of, people all seem to have a lot of rocks. But really the only reality of it is that one person has all of them. So this is how statistics can be distorted. So my question is, well, we're getting these statistics, but I know that they can manipulate them. At least I was even taught that in school. So how do we know they're not doing that? But they don't tell you where the study comes from. You can't go double check anything like that, but you're trusting their authority. So this is an instance where trusting authority works against you. And this is the thing that drives me crazy, that I just bring up the basic point. Everything in the news is done to scare you. Every news story is scary and awful, and it's the most extreme, disgusting thing. You'll hear about how some guy shot his girlfriend in the head and then stabbed her corpse. Why is that news? Why do I need to know that that's the most important thing? And this is the problem. Like, people are just constantly in fear when they watch the news. I'm like, is there never a decent story? Is there never like a normal, like, why are all these events so extreme based on outside of my own perception? When I walk around in my community, I never see any of these things. I might hear a story here or there, but that's not my general reality. And so my question is, like, how is that an accurate representation of things? And why is it always based on fear? To me, it's obvious that there's an agenda, but people will never get that. They're so blinded to think, oh, I'm informed, I'm enlightened because I know what's going on in the Middle East because the news told me so. I don't know, Mike, if you want to respond to that.
Yeah, no, I mean, the media and the news, the movies, Hollywood, it's a big cesspool of mind pollution, of contaminating the mind. And I had the same experience, Michael, growing up. My father watched the news all the time, and there's this inclination to believe. I know my father believed it, that he was getting the true news, that it was accurate, and this is what was going on in the world. But then they would say things like sources within the White House. Well, do they have names? Could you at least maybe clue us in a little bit as to who you spoke to? I like the one where they say unidentified sources have confirmed. That's ridiculous.
Double speak.
Unidentified sources have confirmed, and I would think to myself, that doesn't even make any sense, So yeah, I agree that
because they just made some shit up.
They just made this shit up. It's exactly right, and it's almost like they're laughing at us, especially when they word it that way. But most people, like I said, they just go with the flow and they just ride with it because they think, Mark, going back to how we first kicked this off, why would they do this? Why would the government do this? Why would the news lie to us? They think it's actual news. It's not news, folks. Okay, newsflash. It's the Ministry of Propaganda. You're getting propaganda. That's what you're getting. And you're right, Michael. I'm glad you brought the point up. They never, ever talk about anything positive. You would think nothing good ever happens here in the world. Nothing. Everything is negative.
Hey, I've got a little anecdote for you. I worked in a radio newsroom very early on in my career. Before I became a DJ, I was a tea boy for this local radio station. And I used to hang out in the newsroom and archive old reports and just make the coffee and stuff like that. But I remember this one time very early on in my days with this radio station, I walked into the newsroom and all the journalists were sat around. It was a weekend. It was a Sunday afternoon, I think. And they're all sat there just looking really bored, feet up on the desk. And they were bemoaning the fact that there was no news. The biggest news story of that weekend was a local jam fair in some village, And then I remember the phone rang and it was the police calling through with a story, as they did from time to time. And the journalist that took the call replaced the phone on the receiver and he said, "Thank God there's been a rape."
Oh my God.
So now he's got a story. And the priority for them was having this outrageous, lascivious story that's going to raise interest among the readership. And so he says, "Thank God there's been a rape." And that just really brought home to me the mentality of mainstream so-called journalists.
And that's how some people will defend these sorts of things. They'll be like, oh, well, media is also a business and these stories sell. And it's like in their head, they're rationalizing it. And I'm like, well, you're basically saying that you are taking everything that you believe to be true from immoral news stations. That's the other elephant. It's just like, once they do something that is so egregious, like why do you keep trusting it? And the example I love to give is the whole Kuwait incubator hoax. When I was young, I didn't know about this. I only found out about it through researching World War II revisionism. Because there was some interesting characters involved, Tom Lantos setting that whole thing up, and you find out that this girl who is saying she saw these awful things happen with like incubator babies, she was like the daughter of some major ambassador that had a political motivation to have war happen. I don't know if I'm explaining that exactly. It's been a while since I looked into it. Basically, it was one thing that was just called out as being complete bullshit, and it was warmongering. And there was even a political guy in that had no idea what was going on. And when they interviewed him afterwards, they're like, if you had known that this woman was the daughter of so-and-so, would it have changed your mind? He's like, well, definitely. But he had no clue. So this shows that there are people involved that don't know what's going on. But when you see testimony from a crying girl, that's their number one weapon. Crying women and children. That is how they get you to go do what they want for their agenda. And either the crying women and children are real, but the reason they're crying is not what they tell you, or it's perhaps completely horseshit, dare I say, crisis actors creating something. Whichever way it is, it doesn't matter. It's still fucked up. And so that people will allow that to happen and be like, oh, whoops, that's just one time they lied, whatever. Like, we're just going to keep trying. I'm just like, dude, if you had that happen in real life, if people need to take it to their personal microcosmic world. When people deceive you like that in your real world, do you keep associating with them? Do you keep hanging out with them? Do you keep supporting them? No, you don't, because what they've done to you has probably endangered you and your children. So you you basically remove yourself from them. You don't want to deal with them. But when it comes to the news, oh my God, we just got to keep watching.
The follow-up to that, Michael, is when the story came out that it was fabricated, there was absolutely no investigation. There was no follow-up, that the story was completely bogus. That's how, that was a big piece of why they went to war in Iraq. And people didn't, I'm not just talking about the quote unquote news journalists, because they're not news journalists. They're just, actors, script readers for the Ministry of Propaganda. But the general public, this came out and nobody cared. Nobody cared. And then what happens is they come out with some other lie and people fall for it again and again and again and again. It's just, I don't know. I don't know what to say. I don't want to sound like, a big rain cloud here, but I don't know how to break the code in mass, because the same things keep happening over and over again, and people just react the same way over and over again.
Well, maybe I could throw something in here, because we probably need a bit of optimism at this point. And there were a couple of points that I did want to raise. I've noticed that the control system has taken to having to cover itself against the exposure of some of its fuckeries recently in a way that they didn't used to bother doing. So it's probably worth looking at a couple of these. During the week, we had some really bizarre cloud formations over the UK. I can't think what could possibly be responsible for that. But you had these rows of clouds, all in lines, going right the way across the sky. And they were described in the mainstream media as streets. They were saying there are unusual streets of clouds. And what you had was several newspaper accounts of what was going on. Of course, it was a complete whitewash, forgive the pun, and it was damage limitation. And what they were saying was, oh, it's the muggy weather has created this kind of anomaly whereby the clouds are forming themselves in this way because it's strips of cold air and warmer air arranging themselves in this way. It's complete bullshit, of course, but they felt the need to have to address it because so many people now are starting to notice that the skies are very fucked up and don't look the way they should. So they've had to come out with this cover story, I also saw in the week newspaper reports addressing hand signals that are flashed up by celebrities. So,
Really?
All the newspapers,
That's funny.
666, the covering of one eye, the pyramid. There are so many sports stars, footballers, and actors and TV presenters and musicians now doing these things at press events and when they're caught out in the public and stuff, that the mainstream media has felt the need to address it. Of course, they're not telling you that these are occult hand signs, and they're not telling you the mystery school teachings that they tie into. They're just saying, oh, look at this bizarre sign that this footballer flashed when he scored a goal the other day. And they're making out it's just a big piece of fun and it's nothing to worry about, folks. It's just their way of expressing themselves to the camera. But nevertheless, they felt the need to address it. You've also had mainstream outlets doing analyses, in inverted commas, of symbolism that appears in music videos. So it's all the stuff that I and many others have talked about for years, all this occult stuff that gets inserted into music videos. They're feeling the need to take these apart now and say, oh, look at Jay-Z and Beyonce doing all this crazy stuff. They're just, expressing themselves in this way. It's a way for them to look fashionable and cool. So they're just writing it all off as something innocent, nothing you need to worry about, folks. But nevertheless, they're having to address it. So I've noticed the system is responding now to the large number of researchers, the likes of us, that are putting alternative information out into the public domain and saying, here's something you need to look at. So it's like we're starting to drive the narrative and we're starting to prompt them into taking action against things that we're talking about. And that never used to be the case. So although it's damage limitation and although it's them giving a false account of things to the general public, I think there's some optimism to be drawn from the fact that they're, to a certain extent, dancing to our tune now. Don't know what you guys think about that.
Yeah, I think that the purge from all the major social media platforms, as much as that's a huge problem, is because a lot of people are looking to those platforms for this sort of information. And the excuses that they give us about these things, I think enough people are starting to see, well, this is just dumb. It's just sort of like, you have all these people making all these occult hand signs, and then there's all of this Freemasonic stuff into movies, and that's becoming very prominent, people analyzing those things. And you have to ask, well, why does every freaking movie we see have some sort of an occult initiation theme to it? Why are all these things there that nobody is telling us that are there? It just doesn't become a good excuse anymore. Like, oh, occult stuff is just in right now. It just sells because it's cool. People can make that excuse, and the people want to rationalize it will buy it. But I think that a lot of people who might actually, I guess, entertain looking into these things, they will actually be aware of it because of these sorts of stories. Because for me personally, I didn't wake up because I just didn't know about a lot of this stuff. I didn't even know there was this thing called the Illuminati or whatever. Like, I was just so in my own bubble because I was just in my life working on music, and I just didn't care about this sort of, like, I didn't really think about it. I had suspicions about things being wrong in the world. So I think that this actually helps because there's enough people that, especially younger people, despite people wanting to shit all over millennials, they're going to be more open to these sorts of things because they still haven't gone through as much brainwashing as people when they're looking at it in their 40s or 50s. It's kind of like a bitter sweetness to all of this, I guess, with like these sorts of themes. And then I'm actually surprised that the cloud formations weren't blamed on climate change, because it's like, that's like this thing, oh, just blame anything weird on the weather on climate change, right? That's kind of how they go about it.
They said it was down to muggy weather, but the problem with that is that it wasn't actually muggy on that day. It was actually quite cool. And here's a thing, we've got all these cover stories trying to explain away why we've got all this symbolism and stuff like that. You might think, rather than putting newspapers on a mission to feed some story to the public that this is all it is, folks, it might just be easier to stop doing the friggin' hand signs in the first place and stop putting all this shit into music videos and movies. How about that? So the fact that they continue to do all this shows that this is a real thing. I've been talking for a very long time about revelation of the method, placing the truth in plain sight, aspects of predictive programming, which is why you get all this stuff cropping up. It's obviously important to them to do this stuff. And it really is a thing. Otherwise, they would just simply stop. They would say, we're tired of having to explain this. Let's just stop doing this shit. But, what it is the hand signs and all these gestures and stuff are methods of communication to those in the know. It identifies the individuals that are down with the program, that have been mind controlled or whatever, that are part of certain secret societies. And it's also there to mind control the general public and put subliminal ideas into their mindset. It's very important that they continue doing this. They want to continue doing it. So now they've got to invent their bullshit cover stories to explain what it all is, and just hope to placate an unthinking general public with some infantile explanation.
Well, Mike, why don't you respond, and then after that we'll go into Mark's tirade on techno.
Okay. I was just going to say that we are making a dent, but here's the problem that we have. For us to make a dent, we have to pour immense amounts of energy and time into our research and to get it out. And to get it out, it's very difficult, right? Because we have these platforms. We don't have a mass media helping us out with our information, trying to reach as many people as possible. Of course, they know this, right? This is how it's set up. So when they come out with their cover stories, what happens is, and again, I'm not trying to sound like a Debbie Downer here, because we are making a dent. There's no question. But just their one blurb on all of their mass media that blast out there has an effect on all the time and research that we've put into it. So in other words, we can put in hundreds and hundreds and thousands of hours into our research, and they can just spend 5 or 10 minutes putting some bullshit story out there. And many, many people will sit back, suck down the beers, have their chips, and things go back to normal. That is what we're up against. We're up against really a machine that is just huge. And that's why it's a struggle for us. And the last thing I'll say about this is that this is why I believe that they also did what they did with Alex Jones at InfoWars, right? So I'm not a big fan of Alex Jones at InfoWars. In the very beginning, years ago, I used to watch it, and then it became very clear to me that and there are going to be folks that won't agree, but he's controlled opposition, right? That's my feeling. But what they did when they yanked him off of Facebook and they yanked him off of YouTube, and I think they took him off of Twitter now too, is that was a maneuver where they wanted to paint all conspiracy researchers, all alternative researchers. They wanted to broad brush them with the Alex Jones brush. In other words, Michael and Mark and Mike Williams, we're just like Alex Jones. That's who we are. We fall under his umbrella. And they tried to damage us that way by taking what they built up as the kingpin of conspiracy theorists, Alex Jones, and then try to pull us all under that tent and then take him out. He'll be back, by the way. That's my prediction. He'll be back. But that's part of the maneuvering that they do. That it's very calculating what they do. It's very hard for a lot of people, I think, to get their arms around the fact that the things that they do, their approaches and their techniques, very thought out in advance. They didn't just pull Alex Jones down. They made it. Somebody woke up one day and said, "Oh, let's take him down because of blah blah blah." That's been in play for a long, long time. That's my personal view, right? Part of a strategy, a long-term strategy. So anyway, that's all I'll say about that, so I don't go on and on.
Whether he knows it or not, the whole controlled opposition thing, I think, like you said, you lump everything into one category, and everyone is thinking like, oh, the government's coming to take your kids or whatever.
Well, everyone thinks we're all shouty and angry, just like Alex.
Exactly.
Yeah. And to me, like, the way that he talks about it, like rounding people up and throwing them in FEMA camps, I think that is sort of like an exoteric explanation where, yeah, they're trying to get your kids, but they're just trying to do it through social engineering and stuff like that. Like, think about the mass scale of like actually rounding up people like that. Like, I just think that is a fear thing that's promoted in the truther world, where their methods are much more subtle, and it's just like a slow, acidic dissolving of things rather than one big event. They might use a big event to, engage or put the pedal to the metal during a specific time period. And this can get all into like, a lot of the astrological cycles and the esoteric things, that during this particular time when this planet is in this sign, that might be a good time for them in their mindset to really roll out something like in the 60s with the counterculture and whatever. So
9/11.
Yeah, exactly. And so
right.
To transition, because Mark and I, have talked a lot about the engineering in music, and I think that when I talked to Emily Moyer about this topic of the electronic dance music, there's a lot of parallels to that 60s counterculture and sexual revolution and all of this, openness outside of the borders of the Saturnian structure of American society. And so electronic dance music seems to have a lot of these themes. So Mark, I know this is one of your elephants that you wanted to talk about, that I think it is in both the esoteric and exoteric world, and it impacts both quote unquote normies and then us here in the conspiracy realm. So go ahead and elaborate on that.
Well, yeah, it does. Thanks. You'd invited me to raise an elephant in the room that the truther community or alternative researchers tend not to look at or pay attention to. And I am going to go on a diatribe about electronic dance music, specifically the genre of it that's known as trance. Bit of a clue in the name, maybe. And I know a lot of people are probably going to be rolling their eyes and yawning at the idea of having to listen to a load of stuff about electronic dance music, because that is not everybody's cup of tea. I get that. Particularly older folk that are into other forms of music have absolutely no interest in clubbing culture, and I understand why that would be. But the reason why this genre and what it's being used for is important is because, talk about an elephant in the room, it's so fucking obvious to anyone that's paying attention that this scene these days is being used to normalize ideas of artificial intelligence and the transhumanist smart grid Internet of Things society that we're now into. We're on the 30th anniversary right now of what was dubbed the second summer of love. This was the acid house scene that came out of the UK all through the summer of 1988. It was basically the 60s counterculture repackaged, to my mind. So many of the same tactics were used. You just had ecstasy instead of LSD that was in huge quantities just appearing out of nowhere. You had new styles of electronic dance music starting to come through that was the equivalent of the psychedelic rock that had gone on 21 years earlier. And we can fast forward now to the type of society that we have and how massive that whole dance music scene is, and particularly trance, which is really being used to literally entrance young people all over the world. And look at the symbolism that's being used. Look at the themes that are being portrayed at these big dance music events. Look at the names of them, for fuck's sake. You know, Digital Dreams and Tomorrowland and Future World and things like that. They're telling you what they're doing. They're getting young people through the mind control that's exerted through the sound frequencies that go into this music and through the mind-altering drugs that go along with the scene to be very accepting of artificial intelligence and the idea that technology is great. This is the future. This is where it's all headed. One of the Pied Pipers of that whole scene, who I've had my eye on for quite a while, is a dude by the name of Paul van Dyk, and he's a German electronic DJ and producer. He's an interesting one to study because I was talking earlier about symbolism. Symbolism has always been very heavily attached to this guy's work. So he's got a record label called Vandit. And every time they put out a new release, you get the same kind of artwork, regardless of who the artist is, being put out there on the sleeve. And it always portrays a futuristic cityscape, very heavy on transhumanism. There's a sigil, a certain sigil that's always been associated with Paul van Dyk. It's cropped up at his live shows. It's appeared on his album sleeves. His fans, who are more like a cult than a kind of fan base in terms of the way they revere this guy, have this sigil tattooed onto their skin, such is their worship of this Pied Piper false hero, you know. And I've studied the logo. It's very, very similar. It's basically a pyramid design with two corners cut out, triangular corners. And it's very similar to a logo that used to be used by British military intelligence, MI5, from the 1950s through to the 1970s. The same logo, complete with a capstone at the top of the pyramid with an all-seeing eye in it, has also been rocked by an American-Japanese DJ producer called Steve Aoki. So anyone that wants to write the Paul van Dyk one off as just some innocent symbol that means nothing has got to explain why this other key figure in dance music is also using it. But the whole idea of symbols attached to Paul van Dyk is very interesting because a couple of weeks ago, he announced the release of a new album on his Facebook page. And he was going to call the album Symbols. And it's so bloody blatant. The cover design to the album had a pyramid with Paul van Dyk's eye right in the frigging middle of it. And all around it, you had this kind of zodiacal wheel with all these strange sigils and symbols all around it. It was just so in your face. It was unbelievable. But the thing that really struck me was when he announced this on his Facebook page, there was an absolute tidal wave tsunami of comments from presumably his fan base, who would be the people looking at his fan page, saying, oh, you've sold your soul to the Illuminati. You know, you've sold out to the control system. What's all this? You've joined these secret societies. You're letting us know who owns you. And it was comment after comment after comment, thousands upon thousands of comments. What happened was the following week, you get an announcement that, oh, the album's not going to be called Symbols anymore. It's going to be called Music Rescues Me. And instead of this very elaborate sleeve design, you've now got this very simplistic minimalist one, and they're telling you it's going to be called Music Rescues Me. So there's a couple of possibilities here. One is that those behind Paul van Dyk were testing the waters, maybe slightly taking the piss with this blatantly over-the-top album called Symbols, with all the symbolism attached, and they wanted to see what people would say about it. That's one possibility to consider. But the other possibility is that they got so confident and so brazen with what they were doing that they thought they could put out this album titled Symbols with this sleeve. It would get soaked up subliminally by all the fans, and they could have a good old laugh at how gullible they all were. And when all these people rose up and said, you've joined the Illuminati, you've sold your soul for fame and fortune, they thought, my God, we weren't expecting this. Shit, what do? We're going to have to change the name of the album and hastily concoct some new minimalist artwork. That's another possibility that I think it's worth considering, because I don't think they would have anticipated quite so many people calling them out on their bullshit. So this goes back to what I was saying earlier about how, to a certain extent, we, the public, the people, seem to be driving the narrative and the way things are going. I like to think that the second option there is the most viable. But just looking long term at what dance music and trance particularly is being used to normalize this artificial intelligence society, that is certainly being ramped up big time. And they've got a vested interest in getting young people accepting of where they want to take things. So another topical example, a story I came across just a couple of days ago, quite synchronistically. In my home city of Oxford, England, they are now starting to barcode homeless people. Now, I'm not taking the piss. It's not April 1st. It's not a wind-up. The council are starting to barcode homeless people. And when the barcodes are scanned, the computer system gives their history in terms of how long they've been homeless. This is if they register, of course, and give all these details. How long they've been on the streets. When was the last night they spent in a shelter or a hostel? What health conditions they've got, who their next of kin is, all this sort of thing. They're treating homeless people like a can of beans in the supermarket with a friggin' barcode. So this is an indication of where they want to take things, everything logged and recorded and linked up to this Internet of Things. I had another experience in the week where I tried to book a room via Airbnb.com. People might be familiar with this company, operates out of San Francisco, I think. So when you can't afford a hotel in a particularly expensive city, you have the option of going and staying in somebody's private room that they rent out, and Airbnb will put you in touch with them. However, I wanted to book a room in Sweden, Malmo, and it wouldn't let me do it, the Airbnb system, until I'd uploaded a scan of my passport, the photo page, so that they could verify that the picture on my passport photo page matched my profile picture on Airbnb. So I tried to do this, didn't particularly want to, but it's my only way of getting a room, you know, and it kept rejecting my picture. Oops, sorry, no, try again. So I would try it a second time, try from a different internet browser in case there was some problem with the first one. Oops, no, sorry, try again. So in the end, I got so friggin' frustrated with this that I got in touch with Airbnb's help team. And I said, look, I'm trying to book a room. It keeps rejecting this passport upload. Can I just send you the picture and you verify it and you know, allow me to book the room? And they said, oh, sorry, no, we can't do that. The system decides. So I said, wait, what you're telling me is that artificial intelligence decides who can get a room or not any human being. Well, yeah, that's basically it, sir. Yeah. I said, but surely there must be some way of you overruling the system with some human input and saying, it's okay, this guy is who he says he is. Let's let this booking go through. Oh, no, sorry, we can't overrule it. So there's an admission straight from the horse's mouth that artificial intelligence is running this company's computer system, and there is no facility for human input, which is a pretty dangerous reflection on where we're at in society. And of course, the plans are only for all of this to get taken even further. We've got the planned rollout of 5G technology just around the corner in 2020, when things are really going to get ramped up. But, you know, this is where we're at. And to go back to my original diatribe, the electronic dance music scene and this reverence for technology, isn't it great, is being used to get young people all over the world used to these ways of doing things so that they're completely normal. This is why people need to pay attention to what this scene is being used for. They might not care for the music and, you know, the workings of the scene, but you have to acknowledge the fact that millions of young people around the world are being brainwashed and mind controlled by this aspect of culture for what is known to be coming. That's my rant.
Yeah, I have a lot to say about that, so Mike, I'll let you go first.
Well, I was just going to say that the controllers and their understanding of human behavior is incredibly sophisticated. That's number one. And so with electronic dance music and even back in the 1960s, we had the psychedelic era and so on. they have been at this for a very, very long time. And so their understanding of how humans will react and behave is very involved. I mean, they've done enormous amounts of work in this area. So they know what to float out there and what to expect. So that's now linked with the AI. So before you had the AI aspect of it, the technology, the computers, and so on, to do all this, they had to do it the old-fashioned way, and they were still very effective at it. But today, it's all been fed into an artificial intelligence, and so the AI actually runs scenarios and says, well, if we put this out, we could possibly get the following behavior or reaction from the population: scenario A, scenario B, and C. So this is how sophisticated it has become. That's why they're always 1,000 steps ahead. It's because their computations from this artificial intelligence perspective has run all of these scenarios. This is why computers like IBM's big Deep Blue can beat a world-class chess player, because it's able to do the computations, and it has figured out possibilities way beyond and much, much quicker than the human mind can do. So this is what we're confronted with today, and this is what a lot of folks really don't understand. They want you to believe that AI is going to be something that's going to help you better select, a movie you want to watch on Netflix or some stupid thing like that. It's not. When I worked in the corporate world, we had an initiative. An initiative is still in place, and I'll just say this real quick. It's called business analytics. So what business analytics meant was that we were going to be able to predict a customer's needs before the customer knew that they needed something, a solution, whatever it may be. Okay? So and I say we, I'm talking about the corporate world. I'm not talking about my former company specifically. We're talking about, this is pervasive.
A general mindset.
General mindset. So in the corporate world is to deploy these types of technologies where they're able to predict behavior, predict responses, predict needs. So if they're doing something like that at a corporate level to predict client and customer needs, then you can only imagine what they've done at a much broader level by using collection things like Google, vehicles, I should say, not things, but vehicles like Google, Facebook, Instagram, go on and on and on and on, YouTube. All of these mechanisms, all these platforms are data collection devices, and it's all being put into repositories, and it's all being fed into the AI. And it's extremely sophisticated. And that's why it's very difficult to beat them at this game. I'm not saying we can't. I'm just saying it's difficult because they've been at it a very long time, and the techniques have become extremely sophisticated.
Yeah, the technology stuff, that's like the number one thing, that's the technocracy, as people call it, and back to the electronic dance music, how this gets implemented, I view it as extremely occult and Masonic initiation type parallels. And I did a talk with Emily Moyer on this, and then Mark, you also did a talk with her on these things. Yeah, and the only other people I know is Steve Outram talked about this stuff with Burning Man with Jan Irvin, and other than you guys, I haven't really heard any people really talking about this. And so what I see it as, from what I understand about all my research with esoteric stuff, you have this idea of a one world religion, which is the occult synchronistic religion, and then you have the one world government, through the UN and all of their associations. And then there's sort of like a one world language, which I think is sort of built into the technology of, like binary code, or the language of mathematics that, now if I want to have my monologue in English translated into Hebrew, Google will just do that for me. So the language is united by technology. And then lastly, the music, to me, from what I understand, because I don't listen to this kind of music, I've just never been interested in it. But from what I get from people like Emily and you talking about it, and Steve Outram, it sounds like this to me is like the one world music, because when you can, like, even this started happening when I was younger. I would be in a store and all of a sudden they'd be combining Enter Sandman with Britney Spears' Hit Me One More Time, but it's like a dancey beat. You know what I mean? And I'm just like, what the hell is this monstrosity? And it's alchemy. You're combining these opposite things, and then you're getting this desired effect by people who are thinking, oh, that's brilliant. I'm just like, you're just mashing two things together, and it's just like, it's fucking stupid. I'm sorry. I mean, that's just me,
well,
but
it is literally all over the world.
Yeah.
Sorry to jump in there, but in my presentations, I've given lists of some of these big dance music festivals that take place, and the names are all the same. It's all digital this, tomorrow that, future this. And you look at the geographical spread, it goes literally from Argentina to Brazil to Sweden to South Africa, every corner of the world. It is already the one world religion. Young people in every single country, pretty much. I don't think you would find a country that is populated by, above a certain level where you don't have festivals and clubs that young people go to listen to this music. So we're already there in terms of it being one world music, and it's digital and electronic in nature, all to do with sound frequencies, tying in with the rest of society and where that's all headed. So the infrastructure is pretty much already in place.
Exactly. And I think that this aspect is so important, because one of the things that I've always been kind of promoting as my general theory about what I think is going on is, I think that they are initiating us into the mysteries through these slow processes, and they're trying to destroy the traditional way of being, which is associated with the square and Freemasonry. This is all the profane stuff, the 5 sense reality stuff, which they get us to focus only on that to bring us to the lowest levels of degradation. And then out of that, those ashes of burning it, they're going to create this alternate Gnostic reality that has no attachment to the material world and distinctions and borders. So when you apply electronic dance music to that, I kind of look at the 60s as like the exoteric version of this experiment, because there's so much occult stuff tied to that. It's all about expanding your mind, your consciousness, no more borders, all this oneness. But those bands are still around in the mainstream. You'll always hear the Bird songs and the Doors songs. That's like this version for the masses, and I think that was kind of an experiment to see how things would play out. And I think that the electronic dance music is like the esoteric version, because if you think about it, that's all underground, it's all secretive, it's for a select few, and it's not really that well known to like people in that traditional set. I mean, I don't know anything about it, I never hear it, but I know a lot of people, when they come in, they're just obsessed with it. But it's not something that's like, you don't go to a baseball game and you hear the newest techno mix. You hear Neil Diamond songs or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, and so there's that esoteric component. And then if you think about the process of going to some of these shows, a lot of them involve taking drugs, and that's your initiation. You take this pill, kind of like the Matrix, and then you're open to all of these things going on, and you have the DJ as the hierophant conducting the ritual. You have all these occult symbols and sigils and logos, and it's all about this oneness, being outside of borders, transcending reality, all these sorts of things. And a lot of people who go through those experiences, they usually say, oh, that was my awakening experience, and things weren't the same after that. And that's kind of what Burning Man is on this very macro level. And it's a giant pagan ritual. They're burning a huge effigy, and that's kind of like the symbolic magical act of all of the old ways of being. And then once you go there, you've been transformed. And they even talk about this. The people who go, this is all a transformation ritual.
Burning Man starts today as we record this.
Oh, really? How serendipitous.
So how synchronistic that we chose today to be doing this. And that's when the whole thing kicks off. You've heard Steve Altrin. Yeah. So Steve Altrin talks about how executives from Silicon Valley, from all the big IT companies, are encouraged to go along to Burning Man as like this required social function. And they get fed all this occultic imagery and stuff. Why should that be? Why should that be a thing? Burning Man is...
And then Burning Man is Silicon Valley, according to Elon Musk. That's a very strange quote. Like, you're basically saying that event is the tech industry. And so when you apply all of these transhumanist ideas, this gets back to the occult figure of Prometheus, giving technology to man to escape the physical realm, the rock that he's bound to. This is, the statue at Rockefeller Center. So it's all about this liberation, but is it really liberation? Is it just disguised as liberation, just like the Masonic United States of America with our so-called democracy? You are liberated because you can vote, all these sorts of things. This to me is like the real attachment and agenda that's going towards these millennial generations. And if you think about just the name millennials, this is all tied into the Gnostic interpretations of Revelation with the new millennium and stuff like that. This is their generation that they want as their own. And it's so obvious to me because this is when all of this stuff started getting rolled out, when this generation came about. And I think that this has something to do with all these cycles. So I'll shut up about it for now. I don't know, Mike, you wanted to jump in?
No, just real quick. Aleister Crowley talked about, when he talked about his magic and transforming, his alchemy from a magic perspective is you had to destroy something before you were able to transform it to where you or what you want it to be, right? And Michael, you know this better than I do. So this is what I see going on too. So in order to destroy, we're seeing all this depravity. We're seeing everything just sinking to the lowest level denominator that we can possibly conceive of. And I agree, Michael, that what they're trying to do is they're trying to destroy, and then it rises up. I guess the rise of the phoenix, right? A new era, a new age, whatever. So I do believe that what they're trying to do is they're trying to initiate us into their mysteries. The problem with it, and you and I have talked about this, and I agree with you, is that you'd have to believe that they have good intentions when they're doing this. And even though I understand conceptually and theoretically what they're trying to do, I have a very difficult time understanding that this is the best way to go about it. That's where I get stuck, because all of the harm, all of just the darkness and the negativity of what humanity's being put through, if this is all necessary in order to have that alchemical process to transform into something new and better, some ascension. I don't even know what you would call it.
Well, this is the Darwinism that they look at through the spiritual lens.
Yeah.
And this is all tied in with Blavatsky. They think that this is evolution.
Yes. So that's what I struggle with. I struggle with, okay, I understand their perspective, and I understand, at least theoretically and conceptually what they're trying to do. It's just that I don't trust the actors that are involved in the process. That's the problem that I have.
Nothing to add to that, really.
Well, I just, I'm not quite a millennial, or I don't know if I am. I was born in 82. Am I on the cusp? I'm not really sure. But
you're young.
Somewhere in between.
Well, I have been susceptible to a lot of this programming, but I feel lucky enough that I'm still part of an older generation before that. And so I am starting to see all this stuff come to fruition, and now it's like blowing my mind thinking back to when I was younger, all the ways I was programmed into trying to go along with this. And, really, I think that it is this sort of quote unquote Gnostic paradise where you're in this alternate reality. It's outside of the physical world. And with this transhumanist stuff, it's like, just looking at it with like Guitar Hero. Oh, you don't have to actually learn guitar. And Mike and I know from countless hours of learning an instrument, it's fucking hard work, and it's a lot of frustration and takes a lot of dedication. And now you can just bypass that. And this is where I think movies like The Matrix become sort of destructive. And I think that this is the true intention of why they were released, despite all of the interesting and cool allegories that we can associate with movies like that. It's sort of like, oh, just sit in a chair and you download it. Now you all of a sudden you know how to play guitar. You didn't have to go through that process. And I mean, it sounds awesome, but when you have these people that don't understand the real world and that things take physical work to get shit done, it's like people want to just escape from that into this fantasy land of technology.
You have DJ Hero too.
Yeah. And then I hate to stereotype, but like this is sort of like what I see in like the quote unquote hipster world. Everyone's all about these esoteric things that nobody knows about, and when you work with them at jobs, they suck because they don't want to actually do the work. And again, I'm generalizing here. And then they all say, oh, I make beats. That's what I do. And they're probably shitty beats. You know, it's just like there's no, it's like this self-serving, like, oh, I can just do this and it will be cool. And it's all weird and artsy. And if you get enough people buying it that it's like this great, awesome thing, then you're just in this collective mindset of like, oh, you know, I'm going to shake your hand and call this awesome if you call my shit awesome. And then it gets involved with like Facebook where like, yeah, everyone's their own celebrity. You can just selectively post your virtual world that's completely detached from the reality of your actual world, and you can make yourself look like a rock star. To me, this is all tied in with this, and that's exactly what they want. They want us to be self-serving, but ironically, it's disguised under this collective humanity that they're trying to bind us all to. And you know what? I want to separate from this. I do not want to be bound to all of this fucking bullshit. That's my rant on it.
Well, the world has just changed so much in my lifetime. You know, I'm not that old, not that young, somewhere in between, but I've just seen so many societal changes in the relatively short time that I've been around. I don't know this world anymore, and I don't particularly like it either, which probably comes through from some of the statements that I make. I don't like the way society is headed. I'm not a fan of technology. I don't think letting machines decide what you can and can't do over and above human input is a very good idea. But I seem to be in a minority because most people seem to revere technology in the way that they've been trained to do so. And, you know, my number that remember saner times and prefer to do things in more organic, natural ways seem to be diminishing. So it's just a very alien world to me now. My mum used to say that to me. I didn't used to understand what she meant. You know, 20 years ago, she would say, I don't know this world anymore. And I was just like, oh, come on, mum, you know, you're just old fashioned, get with the program. But here we are 20 years later. I know exactly what she meant. This place just feels very different. And sometimes I begrudge having to be here.
Yeah, I
But
can
anyway,
vouch. I can vouch for that, Mark. I know I'm the oldest guy here, and I've said on a couple of shows that I go back in time to when I was a kid, and you know I was a kid back in the '60s. I was born in 1959, and what I have seen in my 60 years over that time span is are huge changes in how society operates, the moralities in the gutter, um, behaviors in the gutter. It's it's very, very hard, I guess, for people who are young and you know they were basically born into this depravity to see it. But for somebody who was not, and they have a baseline, you can see how things have changed drastically, just drastically. Now I know that going back to when I was a kid, things were still controlled, so I'm not naive. All I'm saying is that the difference between the control back then and the control today, um, there's a huge difference, and it's not a change for the better at all. So, I, for the folks that are listening to this that are younger, and you've got many years ahead of you, you need to wake up and understand what's taking place here because I have no idea what this is going to look like another 10, 20 years, guys. I really don't. I don't think it's going to be a pretty picture
scary.
at all. Yep.
Scary when you got kids that are going to have to grow up in this world.
Yep.
Well, we're almost to the 2-hour mark, so maybe we should just go to the solutions part.
Mike,
I don't know if that's
did you have your rant proper?
I think I had my rant. I feel exercised.
The other Mike, did you have a particular rant?
No,
or did we,
yeah,
we do
but
that?
it's okay because we're at the 2-hour mark, so we should talk about solutions. We really should. So, who wanted to start with that?
Why don't you start with it since you're talking?
Okay. All right. So what I have been communicating out to my audience is that, and the example I've used is you have a football field and it's 100 yards long, and the first 50 yards is your physical experience, and the second 50 yards is your spiritual experience, your spiritual component or aspect of yourself. And in order for us to to really get out of this life and this experience what we need to get out of it, we need to connect back to spirit. We need to understand that there's a whole other half of this game. And what I have found with, we call them the normies before, but even many, many people in the truther community, in the alternative research community, they spend virtually all of their time in the physical piece of this experience that we've come here to experience, this life. And when you just spend all of your time in that first 50 yards, what's happening is you are essentially sub-optimizing your life by 50% because you're not plugged into the spiritual piece of this. Because the spiritual lessons are very, very important. And my view on this is that to the degree that you understand what this realm is all about, to the degree that you figure out the lies and the deception, you take that knowledge and that wisdom with you from a soul perspective. Now, when you pass away and you cross over, and it's time to experience another life or some other learning, your soul has additional opportunities made available to it because your soul has broken the code to a certain degree, right? So if you learn just like an inch of truth, then when you pass away and you cross over, your soul will have an inch of additional opportunities made available to it in order to explore and experience. If you figure out a foot, you're going to get a foot more opportunity. If you figure out a mile, you're going to get a mile worth of additional opportunities. So that's why this is very important. This is not all for naught, is what I'm saying, because you'll hear some truthers and people in the alternative research community say, I don't know, this is never going to change. We're never going to change the physical world. And we may not change the physical world. But to me, at the end of the day, is the physical world is the way it is because there's a spiritual learning and a spiritual component to this that we're supposed to become aware of, that we're supposed to embrace and we're supposed to nurture and to grow. And so that's been my way of explaining solutions, because I don't know if it's possible to change the physical world, because maybe the physical world is not supposed to be changed at this point in time. Perhaps the physical world is going through its cycles. We talk about the Iron Age, the Silver, the Bronze, the Silver, and the Gold Age, right? Going back to the Greeks and the Hindus, they called them the Yugas. The Earth, this realm, will change, but it's going to change as it cycles through. So what do we do during those particular cycles? Now, we're in the Iron Age right now. It's full of deception and lies and all the stuff that we've been experiencing. The takeaway is that we understand the lies, we understand the deception, and then take it with us, because it doesn't go away. It does not go away. You're going to grow your soul's wisdom, your soul's knowledge, and that's how, when we leave this world and we go into the non-physical world, I mean, that's where we really reside. That's where we live. We don't live. We come down here. We participate in a play. This is theater. And our bodies are avatars. We play characters. You live 75, 80 years, 90 years, and it's all over. The physical piece is all over. So there's a whole non-physical piece of it, the metaphysical aspects, the spiritual piece of it that are very important. And I think more and more people really have to connect into that. And it's not new agey, in my practice, I do a lot of spiritual regression. I can tell you guys, I've been doing it for over 8 years, and I don't even count anymore the number of clients that have come in to have spiritual experiences. And there's just that common thread about what this is all about. It's all about learning. It's all about helping others. That's what this is all about. So if we're going to continue, and obviously the three of us, to continue to not see the second 50 yards of the ball field, and we're only going to play on the first 50 yards, and we're going to knock our head into a brick wall, and it's going to hurt a lot, and we're not going to make much of a difference. And the other way that we put solutions in play is to lead by example, to be role models for other people. That's what we need to do. Speak the truth. Don't be afraid to speak the truth. and just live your life. I mean, walk the talk basically is what you've got to do. So that's my piece of it. And you guys can let me know what you think, or you can give me your solutions.
Mark, you can go ahead.
Well, that was beautifully put, Mike, and I co-sign all of that. Your line of thinking very much tallies with mine. If you're trying to find solutions to an apparently 3D physical world with apparently 3D physical reactions, you're going to be bashing your head against that wall, because that's not what this place is. It's illusory. It's a construct. It's a place that we come to have these experiences, to learn these lessons. That's absolutely what this place is. And it can be very, very difficult to go through that. I'm someone that finds life very difficult. I just find it difficult getting through every day. It's a struggle for me, because I think beneath everything, I've got a recognition of the fact that this is not where we're meant to stay. This is not our natural home. It's just somewhere we come to do some work and figure some things out. And for those of us that are engaged in this line of work, it's just a case of continuing to do it. You just got to keep on keeping on. We need to engage new people on these paths and encourage them to make better decisions and wake up to truths. But as far as we're concerned, those of us already walking this path, we just got to keep walking it, keep on keeping on. I like to think that there are better things awaiting us when we depart this realm, through having made this obligation and made this free will choice to do this with our lives. I certainly believe that there are. It's my view that in an aspect of higher consciousness, we actually judge ourselves. I don't think there's some tyrannical God that stands over you in judgment when you depart this place and says, you've been a very bad person, back you go. You're going to suffer some more. I think we review the life that we've just lived and the choices that we made, and that aspect of us, which is an expression of the divinity of the Godhead, we judge ourselves and we decide what is next for us. Do we need to come back to this place and learn some more lessons, or are we ready now to progress onto some higher aspect of spiritual existence? For me, the worst thing imaginable is having to come back to this place and do it all over again. So anything I can do to earn my stripes and get my one-way ticket out of here works for me.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think I have a lot of similar viewpoints. There are some things that I sort of differ on, but it's stuff that, like, I don't let it get in the way of how I interact with people in the spiritual world, because a lot of it is just you're seeing what's going on in the physical world, and if there is something to this as above so below projection or axiom, I mean, no matter what way you take it, people in the more Christian viewpoint, well, those are words that Jesus said. If you take it in a more occult viewpoint, those are words like Hermes Trismegistus said. So to me, I think that understanding that is a part of the reality is the first step. Now, discerning what that really means and what you think about it, that's where people tend to differ on these things. But I think that for me, if I was like offering solutions, I just say things that have worked for me personally. And one of the things I think it's a good idea. It doesn't necessarily always have to work this way, but I think starting with the foundation on the lower level of your physical nature, your health and your diet, figure out what works for you. And this is really difficult because there's so much shit out there telling you conflicting things. People are promoting this or that as this miracle cure, and then you'll hear one side saying that this is bad for you, one side saying it's good, and then all of a sudden it will reverse. Like I think like coconut oil, that's a great example. All of a sudden it's terrible for you. Oh, all of a sudden it's this miracle. And I think that muddies the waters intentionally. And I think that some of the things that bring your health to an optimal place are actually very simple and traditional, but there's so much shit there that we kind of go down these rabbit holes and we don't really identify those issues. And I just did a talk with Emily Moyer on this. It's probably going to be up before this discussion, so people want to go back and listen to some of that. She's getting into a lot of this health stuff. And then that in conjunction will help your mental process. If you are feeling better physically, your mind's going to be more clear. If I know, like, when I'm hungry, I get cranky and then I start becoming a diva. and I'm not thinking as clearly. And once I'm able to eat, I feel better. That's just like a natural thing. And so you want to make sure that you're operating as optimally as you can. And I think that it's actually simple getting your health better, cutting out like one big thing is not good for you. Like if you drink soda, just don't drink soda. Don't worry about anything else. Just try that and see how you feel. And then you build upon that. Okay, now that I've got that and I feel better, I don't want to go back to it. So now let me work on, I smoke cigarettes or whatever it might be. You know what I mean? Keep those things very simple, because if you jump into this health realm and you try to do too many things at once, you're going to get discouraged and then you're going to probably quit on it, And so that leads to your mental abilities. That's when you have to be able to take all the stuff and rationalize it, process it through your brain. And then you have to be able to separate your mentality from your emotions at the start, and then you get your emotional health in check. A lot of that has to deal with your own quirks, your own emotional baggage that you have to be honest about. And a lot of time, be honest about that is admitting that you might have had destructive mindsets. You might have actually been a bad person in certain instances, and just kind of rationalizing or denying it. So dealing with those two planes, your emotional level and your mental level, doing that sort of alchemy with it, you separate them and then you put them together, and you try to do that to where you are more in control of your own life as to who is making the decisions. And then you can realize that, hey, when I do this, I impact other people. Like you said, Mike, leading by example. If you want to lead by example and you haven't kind of worked out all those other things in a way that I look at it as percentages. If more of a percentage of the time you're in line with those things, let's say just even 75% of the time you're able to do those other things, you're going to be doing a lot more good. And then from that, you have to build it up in your family. You have to fix family issues. Not that you can just put a Band-Aid on it, but you do everything you can to do things right. And then you have to realize that some people might not respond in the right way, and you have to figure out how to deal with that. So that is all the stuff that I think leads you up to a spiritual perspective and steering you towards perhaps aligning with one that is more in nature with reality. Because I think that the quote by Paul is like, we see through a glass darkly. It's like, I think that there's an objective truth. I think that there absolutely is, but we all see it subjectively, and that is the issue, and that's why we all battle back and forth on these things. But I don't think it's just morally relative and all this stuff that's to me gotten us to the state that we're in, everything we're complaining about. So I'll stop my rant on that if you guys want to respond to anything there.
No, I think I find it amazing that the three of us, we did not discuss this before the show as far as the solution, and the three of us are pretty much on the same road as far as what needs to get done. And I agree, Michael, that taking care of your mind and your body is very, very important, because taking those contaminants out of the body and out of the mind, you are going to think clearly, and you're going to have more energy. You're going to be more alert. And this is going to open the door for possibly that whole piece that we spoke about earlier about critically thinking and free thinking. So that was a very, very good point about the taking care of your mind and your body.
And it's work. It's hard. That's the problem. Like, you have to go through some frustration to figure these things out. But I think that having that willingness to do that shows that you give a shit. And that is what you sign up for. That's the process every day. You put in the work, but then you get used to it. Becomes that's where the creature of habit comes in. If you're a creature of better habits, you're going to produce a lot better fruit. And that means also restricting things, cutting things out. Like, even you've mentioned this before when we talked offline, like not watching so many conspiracy videos, because there is an agenda to put a lot of fear porn out there and get people scared about all kinds of things. And, there might be legitimate concerns here or there, but when they get exaggerated to this level where, like, I can't do anything about this, I shut down. I mean, it's no different than how the media works. So be careful not to fall into conspiracy traps. That's another thing I'm guilty of this.
Well, we all are. I think that we all spend time doing that. And that's one of the, I'm on this, this whole trek now where it goes back to my analogy with the football field, the physical world. If you spend all of your time as a truther, just focus on all of the really negative stuff, and you're jumping down all the rabbit holes and you're digging into the pedophilia. what you're doing is you are just feeding the negative aspects of existence by just putting your attention and your thoughts there. You know what? It's good to know about this stuff. You need to know about it, because by knowing about it, you're able to avoid a lot of the traps that they put in our way as we progress through our lives. But we need to spend quality time, a lot of really good quality time on the positives, focusing
You
on.
need to not feel guilty about enjoying yourself in life, because
Exactly.
we make big sacrifices. Those of us doing this work, we wallow in all this depraved material. You've got to feel okay about enjoying the blessings that life has to offer, the joy. It's all part of the rich experience of life. You suffer for a while, you go through hardships for a while, but you've got to be able to enjoy everything that creation can offer, and enjoy all the potential of a human life. So we shouldn't feel guilty about that. I'm gonna have to run, guys. I'm sorry, I have to dive off now. But
no problem. Well,
No problem, Mark.
thanks so much
I
for
know
having
we're
the
about done, but
conversation.
gonna have to run off now. So, yeah, great conversation. Really enjoyed kicking it with you guys, and I think this is a really worthwhile show we're going to put out. Thanks.
Thank you.